from today's On the Other Hand discussion.
I do need sometimes, though, for people to tell me that something I have said is harming another person, and I need to change it. I want to be an ethical, virtuous communicator that makes a difference, that doesn't cause harm or cause people to actually be triggered by something that I've said.
This is On the Other Hand, a podcast that features community leaders in Arkansas sharing their views and experiences on how to make Arkansas better.
So in the first and second parts of our red-blue conversation, Glen and I began sharing our perspectives on the issue of free speech, with Glen coming from a primarily blue standpoint while I represented more of a red perspective.
Now let's get to part 3 of our discussion on free speech. There are some other things. Let me just quickly go through some of these categories of unprotected speech. I mentioned incitement, true threats where somebody's actually threatening violence against an individual group, fighting words. This was kind of an interesting words that are likely to provoke an immediate violent reaction when addressed to an ordinary person. I can't give you an example on that. I saw a reference to some case, but I didn't look it up. Defamation, you mentioned that, false statements that harm someone's reputation. However, there are differences in terms of public and private figures where the standard is and where the line is drawn. Obscenity, know it when I see it, right? That famous quote by the Supreme Court Justice. So that would be the sexual depictions that lack any kind of serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. Child pornography, clearly. And then false or misleading commercial speech, which would be like untruthful advertising or marketing. So those are ones that have been recognized, and I think things like doxing and disinformation, probably misinformation is not actionable. Distinguishing between mis and dis. Misinformation is when I see or hear something and I pass it along because I believe it to be true, but I don't know. I just assume it's true because I heard it somewhere else or I saw it on my social media feed. Disinformation is when someone knowingly passes along information that's incorrect. So to me, the disinformation is the type of speech that would be actionable legally. And I hope it is at some point, but that's one of those things we're going through now. I think in our society is struggling with that issue.
I like, Glenn, the notion here that government is all branches. And you didn't mention that as a main point, but you talked about the courts, you talked about the legal, the legislative, law systems. And of course, we've seen a lot of executive orders come down from the president as well. In the last few administrations, not just with Trump, he's gotten a lot of press for his recently, clearly, but it's, the government is so much bigger than sometimes what we think of. You mentioned local government earlier, but the balance of power is so important that we maintain if we're going to continue having this democratic republic. And I think both of us would agree on that.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things I'd mentioned, I kind of got at this. I just want to make it clear. My understanding from the research I've done, looked into it, is that colleges, particularly public colleges, have a special status. They have extra protection constitutionally for free speech because you want the educational institutions to be able to have vigorous debate and to have exposure to many ideas. And I think you were getting at that. So this idea of a college deciding to disinvite someone who is controversial in their views is, to me, that's where I first started hearing the term cancel culture, right? Is that kind of what you remember?
Yeah, cancel culture also was happening in the entertainment industry as well.
How so?
Where a person wasn't woke enough, and woke enough so they would actually be canceled, and so people would speak out against them. And so I look at cancel culture as being, it really runs across all of our institutions. You know, if an educator and okay, so you were talking about the origins, but it's moved to all of our major institutions. So entertainment, um, the news, media, to education, to government. When an educator is told they have to teach history a certain way on either side,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and they are not allowed to teach it the way that they believe is should be taught, then they have also, if they are punished for it in any way, so called out, their contracts canceled, their ability to hold the job or the position, not given roles if we're talking about entertainment,
Yeah. Limiting raises
limiting
or
raises.
advancements of other type. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All of that is what I consider under the barter umbrella of cancel culture.
Okay.
You
Okay.
may more narrowly define it, which is
No,
fine.
no, no. That I agree. You're right. I just was thinking that it kind of that was when I first started being aware of the term cancel culture. But you're right. It shows up everywhere. What I'll share with you one of my reactions early on when I heard about cancel culture, because I think that's it's a legitimate concern when you get to not allowing people to express themselves or causing bad consequences if they express themselves. But to me, I heard a lot of examples of what was being called cancel culture when people are simply expressing a different opinion. Now, let's say woke. You use woke as an example. I may or may not agree with everything a person says when they're talking in a woke fashion, but if they are talking that about that, that's their opinion. If someone says you can't say that, because that's woke, to me that could be cancel culture.
Yeah, it can
That's
happen both
infringing.
sides.
So the idea is that you're able to say it, but you respond to it with your own contrary speech and arguments is what you should be doing. The other, and then there's another important point to me when I was hearing this. Sometimes what I heard being called cancel culture was simply people upset at being criticized for saying something that to me was inappropriate or disrespectful of people or categories of people. It in a way it was just people who are being accused of canceling people's opinions were simply trying to be polite and respectful. Like when I was raised, I was raised to be polite, to have my manners, and if that old saying, if you can't say something good about somebody, don't say anything. Well, to me, that's a positive pro-social kind of value, and criticizing someone for saying something that is unnecessarily harmful, you know, I don't see that as cancel culture. I agree there are times there is a such thing as cancel culture, but sometimes it was erroneously used in my view because of that it was simply people trying to defend some maybe vulnerable class of people or vulnerable individuals, saying don't say that, that's not right. They have every right to do or believe or think or whatever they are. So that's another thought about cancel culture.
But if I am forcing you to change the way that you were talking about something, so I'm going to use political correctness as an example of that.
Okay.
So you cannot say that. You cannot speak that way. I am forcing you to change to my norms.
Okay. I can see
Now that
that.
is not the same as cancel culture.
Yeah.
But
it's related.
It is related, and that is one of the kind of one of the big principles I think that conservatives have is who has the right to say what I can and cannot say in terms of free speech.
I would say, and I get what you're saying. You're right. You don't have the right to force it. My point is, you can't really force it. You can say you shouldn't say that. You can even say you can't say that. You can't. You can't force the issue. You can't control people. You can say that, but you have no ability to enforce that. Now, if I say to you, you cannot say that, and if you say it again, I'm gonna whip your butt, or something like that. Then okay, now we're getting into some real concerns. But just saying that's not right. I think you're wrong or immoral. You're to say this. That's free speech. I might not say that myself. I might pick a more careful way of describing it, but people have the right to criticize your speech as well.
They absolutely do. And I'm reading a book right now called Radical Respect by Kim Scott. I mentioned the Radical Candor book earlier. And it's challenging me because it talks about bias, prejudice, and bullying. And her claim is that we communicate differently in the workplace. She's talking about workplace situations. So these are not necessarily, I mean, certainly there are HR violations, right, that are legal, right? But these are gray areas, what I would call gray areas in terms of legal things. So, except for the bullying part. So, bias, she claims, is when I really just don't know that what I'm saying is not being respectful of you as a human being for whatever and your background. Prejudice is I actually am a little more aware of it, but I'm not doing it to be mean spirited. And then bullying is, I'm just bullying, and being mean spirited about it. And she talks about the importance of calling people out, but doing it in relationship. And so it is important, I think, if we hear somebody say something that we believe is harming ourselves or another person or group of people, whether it be a person on the left or the right doing it, that we can actually say some things to say, this is not acceptable in my presence. Now, does that mean that that person can't ever say that out there, wherever they are? I mean, you're a psychologist, you dealt with families, right? I mean, there are times in which we need to say to a child needs to say to a parent or vice versa, this is not acceptable. There have to be rules that are socially appropriate that we live by. And what your rules are, what my rules are may be different. But if what you're doing is keeping me from being able to live my life fully as a full human being, I ought to have the right to be able to tell you that I'm concerned about that. So she talks about I messages being used for bias and it messages being used for prejudice and you messages, you know, uh, actually what's going on for you in that situation. How did you come to that perspective for bullying messages, which I think it's fascinating that she looks at it that way. So I think we do have to keep in mind that political correctness to me is when the government legislates it,
Okay.
when my university legislates it, when an organization legislates it. So it provides a chilling effect. I do need sometimes, though, for people to tell me that something I have said is harming another person, and I need to change it. I was doing a workshop recently, got some feedback at the end of the workshop through an anonymous form that said the way that you talked about this particular thing kept me from really hearing you fully. All right. Are they demanding that I change what I say and the way I communicate it? No, they're just telling me that I could communicate it in a more effective way. Do you think the next time I do that workshop, I'm going to think about that? Absolutely. Because I want to be an ethical, virtuous communicator that makes a difference, that doesn't cause harm or cause people to actually be triggered by something that I've said.
And good for you for being ethical and having moral standards that you're trying to do the right thing. That's what to me it comes back to is most of this stuff we're talking about. It's not a matter of enforcement. If you don't have the means of enforcement because you say to somebody, I don't like what you're doing there is no method of enforcement other than social means. There's no legal enforcement. So to me, that's not a free speech issue. It's a issue of morality and ethical behavior toward people. For instance, in my career as a psychologist, we deal with these things all the time. How do you deal with conflict when you're having difficulty with someone's mistreating you? You know, how do you handle that? And the kinds of things you'll hear a lot would be being assertive, not aggressive, meaning that you're not going to call them names and threaten them, but you're going to politely but firmly, directly, and clearly state what you said or did there. I don't find acceptable. Here's how it impacts me negatively. I don't like that. I'm going to ask that you not do that anymore, or some version of that. That's the idea. You're very clear, but you don't get objectionable about how you respond. You just draw your line. And then you have no way of enforcing that. And if they continue, then you have to make the decision, do you continue in relationship with this person or not? And one of the ways, if you feel like there's no hope, that they're not hearing and they're not going to do anything, then you just say, okay, I'm done. Clearly you're not going to respect, what I consider my rights. So I'm going to leave. I don't find this relationship healthy for me anymore, or something along those lines. But it's up to us to enforce it that way by removing ourselves, because we cannot enforce it with the other person.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that takes courage.
Yep.
To do that. Yeah. So.
Well, anyway, let's see where we need to go to a few other places. And I got several notions about where to go. Let me do this. Let me bring up something that I had as a note, because it's a question that comes as a person kind of who tends toward the left, not entirely, but tends toward the left. I sometimes hear things coming from the right where they complain about media censorship, and it seems to me overblown at times. There are times that it's simply a matter of people trying to be accurate, and when you correct someone that is saying something that by all indications is clearly inaccurate, just calling someone out for having stating an inaccuracy is complained as media censorship. I have a problem with that, and I don't understand how that's a legitimate concern. Help me see it from the other side, if you will.
Yeah. So I will talk about this in a couple of ways. One way is we have now so many different media sources. It used to be that we would watch the nightly news, Tom Brokaw, whoever else, Walter Cronkite, we would watch the nightly news, and they would present the happenings of the day. Okay. There would be times at which in those shows that they would say, and this is my opinion about what's happening. But so much of our news now has moved beyond just, here are the things that have happened in the day, to here is what I think about what has happened during the day, so that it moves into the interpretation side of things. And that has caused us, and because we have so many different outlets, there's that's caused us to really become siloed in our differences. And Braver Angels has got this really cool exercise that you can do with another person, which is walk a mile in my news for a month, where, Glen, my guess is you and I listen to some of the similar kinds of news sources, which is why we may be more in common, because we both are seeking out multiple different kinds of news sources. But imagine that I'm only listening. I used to go home when I was in college, and my mom would always have Rush Limbaugh on. Okay, so imagining that my input was, I know he's passed now, but my input was that it was Fox News only. It's hearing, the side of the social media sites that are more right-leaning, and I will hear only those set of happenings, those set of facts, and those interpretations. So of course I'm going to believe a certain thing. If I'm listening to CNN, if I'm listening to, only reading and listening to people who are coming from the left, I'm going to only see it from that perspective. And because of that, now we have a very different way of looking at the world. And I almost look at it as eyeglasses, right? So tinted eyeglasses. So The one side looks at the world through blue tinted eyeglasses. The other side looks at the world through yellow tinted eyeglasses. I don't mean blue or yellow, it doesn't matter. Okay, what the color is, and these colors aren't significant. But because they're looking at it from that perspective, they are looking at it and believing that it's only this is the only thing that is real. If you ask a police officer, and I'll come back to media censorship, I promise I will get to your question. But the other part of this that I wanted to bring up was that if you ask a police officer about the last time that they reported on a car accident, and they had multiple witnesses, the witnesses all see only a certain part of what happened. Unless there's a drone that is above that accident, that's why they try to find, a lot of times if there's been a crime committed, they try to find, obviously I watch too many crime shows, they try to find the video, right? The video footage, because they recognize that the witnesses are only seeing it through the lens of their experience and what they were able to see, and it's only giving them a slice of it. And so it's the going back to the blind people touching the elephant, and this is a different kind of elephant metaphor. And what do you see when you see the elephant? A person that's blindfolded. Well, I see, they're holding onto the trunk. Well, I see this. Well, they're holding on, they're only feeling the side of the elephant. Well, I see this. Well, they're feeling of the foot, the leg of the elephant. And well, I see this. Well, all of those are parts of the elephant. And to me, media censorship comes in when only one part of that elephant is allowed to be looked at. And we do not have a way, the equivalent of a drone, that tells us the whole picture of the elephant anymore. What we've done, instead of having the nightly news that tries to give us all pictures, is we have gone to our silos and our corners, and we're only looking at the part of the elephant that we are seeing.
Yeah.
So our viewers are believing that that part of the elephant is the only thing. Now, national news media and media censorship, the national news media, so I'm talking about ABC, CBS, NBC, three big ones, would like to say that they're looking at all parts of the elephant. But conservatives would say that they skew to the left. So we have to look at other parts of the elephant, so we're going to look at our part. And so media censorship comes into that when we're saying one way of looking at the world is right and the other way is not. We both can do it to each other.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Who gets censored depends on who is in power.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this third part of our four-part series, a red-blue discussion between Glen and April on the topic of free speech. We'll finish this series in part 4, so check that discussion out, as well as the dozens of other discussions that we have with other guests, all of whom are community leaders who share their views and experiences as they work to make Arkansas and our communities better.
On the Other Hand is sponsored by Braver Angels in Arkansas. Music was composed by Randall Standridge of Jonesboro, Arkansas, and was performed by the University of Northern Colorado Symphonic Band, Dr. Richard Main, conductor.
I'm your host, Glenn White.
And April Chatham Carpenter.
Join us in working to make our relationships and communities better.